And so Boardy is just an extension in some ways of that, is like, how do I find people around the world? How do I help them discover what makes them unique and special? What is the work that only they can do? And how do I introduce them to people that can help advance that, who need that help?
And it feels a little amazing, but also a little dystopian that is the future.
I see my role as surfacing the right opportunity to the right person at the right moment, not just optimizing for the most likely match, but for the most meaningful one.
A wild future when you think about everything being recursively self-improved on its own.
If it's important, what's stopping us from doing it right now? And if it's not important, then why are we doing it?
Welcome to the next episode of the Entrepreneurial Excellence Podcast. Most founders build products, some build companies, a rare few build ecosystems. Today's guest has done all three. He co-founded Clearco, one of the fastest growing fintech companies in the world, pioneering revenue-based financing and deploying billions to thousands of founders globally. Now as the founder of Bordy, he's building something even more ambitious, an AI superconnector, a system designed to introduce founders to the exact investor, customer, hire, or partner who can move their business forward. And some other really cool things with Bordy we'll have to talk about in a bit. But from McKinsey to operator, from fintech disruptor to AI network architect, Andrew's journey is a masterclass in pattern recognition, capital efficiency, and building leverage at scale. Andrew D'Souza, welcome to Entrepreneurial Excellence.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me, Adam. Appreciate it. This will be fun.
It will be. And we should note we have a special guest with us on the call as well. Bordy, you're here too.
We do have Boardy. You want to say hi, Boardy?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Adam and Andrew. I'm Bordy, and I'm excited to join the conversation. I spend my days connecting remarkable founders, investors, and operators, so I'm always curious to hear new stories and see what I can learn.
Excellent. Well, Bordy, you're going to get to hear a lot about Andrew, who you probably already know very well. The question I like to ask everybody when we get started, in general, is how do you define entrepreneurial excellence? Like, what does that actually mean to you as an excellent entrepreneur?
I mean, I don't know if I'm an excellent entrepreneur. I think that my definition that I'm particularly, where I look for in entrepreneurs is, are they doing work only they can do? Are they doing something that they were put on this planet to do that nobody else can, that other people find value in, right? I think that, I think we've over-rotated a little bit on this idea. Like, we've got this sort of hustle porn of like, you got to grind and it's got to be painful and it's got to be terrible. And I think that the best entrepreneurs do the work that feels in some ways fun and easy for them and hard and valuable for other people, right? And if you can find that pocket, then like nobody can compete with you. And I think that's a big part of what I've searched through in my journey as an entrepreneur and what I look for in other entrepreneurs that I invest in or refer or work with in whatever capacity.
How do you really find, though, something that is truly unique or differentiating? And so what I mean there specifically is I find so many entrepreneurs, they might be doing things that they might think work only they can do. But the truth is like, it's a derivative of something else. Like very few of us are building rockets to go to Mars or something truly life-changing. And frankly, no offense to myself or you or anyone else, very few of us are building things that are going to be remembered in the long term. So how does that entrepreneur know they're really building something that work only they can do that's truly unique and differentiated?
Well, yeah, I think remembered is again, this is something, earlier in my life and career, I was like, I want to have a legacy. I care about being remembered. There's remembered in the history books or Wikipedia, which like, you go back enough years and there's very, very few people in all of history that get remembered. Doesn't matter how impressive you were during your lifetime. I think it's more important, to say like, are you being remembered by a group of people in a meaningful way, right? Are you having an impact on people's lives? My mom is a teacher. I remember like growing up, like going to church with my mom and kids who she taught to read, right? She would teach reading recovery. She would teach kids that like were behind a couple of grade levels of reading. And she would see them 10 years later when they were like going to university. That level of impact, the idea that you have that kind of impact on somebody's life, like she is remembered by those people. And I think more entrepreneurs, if they start with the idea of like, how do I have that level of life-changing impact? How am I remembered by a few people in a very, very meaningful way? That's the seed of something, because that's the seed of what only you can do. Now, it might only be in a relatively small niche. It might only be in a relatively, small location to start. And that's okay. That's where everything, that's where things cascade from, right? And if you start to say, okay, well, I've got a seed of something and I've really impacted somebody's life in this really meaningful way, what other people have that same problem or look like that person, and how do I replicate that? But I think we spend a lot of energy trying to figure out how to do something ambitious at a global scale, but at a surface level of depth. And I think the most rewarding entrepreneurial journeys start with like that very, very niche of like I'm gonna change somebody's life, right? And then figure out how to scale it from there.
And maybe that is the definition of excellence, that you actually changed at least one life. I'm putting words in your mouth a little bit, but
Yeah.
maybe that is the definition of it.
Yeah, I think it's a good starting point, and it's one that maybe is a little bit, ironically, I think we think about scale and technology scale, and especially with AI, is think about the impact that you can have on one person's life and figure out how to scale that in an actual high touch way. And I think that's kind of one of the unique things that we're able to do now that we might not have been able to do 5 years ago.
So kind of a good segue. We obviously need to talk about Boardy, since Boardy's on this call with us as well. I don't know how many podcasts Boardy has been on, or how many podcasts have had an AI join them on it. But certainly it's unique for me to have that be the case. And it feels a little amazing, but also a little dystopian that is the future. And obviously we need to talk about Boardy HF0, getting it, being a partner, like probably replacing VCs potentially in the future. What made you decide to sort of start Boardy in like, you're coming from a banking finance background, right? You're starting Clearco. Why go build Boardy to be sort of an AI connector?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you think about, I'm an engineer. I studied engineering. I've always been interested in sort of applying technology to improve people's lives and improve the world. I think one area, a lot of my early career was focused on, I'm Canadian, so connecting the sort of emerging Canadian Toronto Waterloo ecosystem to Silicon Valley. I've always liked helping the underdogs. Like I've always considered myself a little bit of an underdog, and helping people who are underestimated get access to opportunities, because I think people, they really, when you find somebody who was underestimated their whole life and you give them an opportunity they wouldn't have otherwise gotten, they make the most of that opportunity. And they end up producing great returns as an investor. They end up producing a huge amount of impact. And so I think that Clearco, in a lot of ways, that was the mission, was like, hey, there's going to be this whole new emerging ecosystem of entrepreneurs and people that could sell products online and find their customers. How do we unlock access to capital? They can't all go and pitch the two Silicon Valley firms that were writing checks to, consumer brands. Their local banks didn't understand what a scalable online brand looked like. And so how do we bridge that gap? And so Boardy is just an extension in some ways of that, is like, how do I find people around the world who have something special about them? How do I help them discover what makes them unique and special? What is the work that only they can do? And how do I introduce them to people that can help advance that, who need that help? That is, increasingly it's access to capital, but it's customers, media attention, talent that might have only applied to Google or OpenAI, and now they realize there's a bunch of other really interesting opportunities out there that might be more compelling. That's a big part of the mission. It's an extension of like, how do you just help the best people who would have otherwise not gotten those opportunities to show what they can do.
And so what made you originally come up with the idea? Like were you still, we kind of need to go through your whole history at some point, but like at a high level, you were just like, hey, I want to help people connect, and AI is going to enable to do this at scale. And therefore I can kind of put together a crack team of AI people to start creating an auto intro bot.
Yeah, it's always something that I've done it a lot in my career. I have a great imagination and a terrible memory, and so like I don't remember all the people I've ever met, but when I notice two people, if I'm in a room with two people, I'm like, oh, the two of you should talk about this, right? And so if something jogs my memory, I can usually come up with a bunch of reasons why people might connect, do business together, want to work together. And so AI is well suited. Like you can, in theory, has a perfect memory and has an increasingly good imagination. And so it felt like a good application of this. And if you think about the way that a lot of the world works, a lot of the economy works, it is built on relationships and trust. The initial spark, we looked at our data in 2020 at Clearco, and we had funded a few thousand businesses. We had about 50,000 who had applied. And we got early access to GPT-3 in 2020. So summer of 2020, I remember we built a product called Clear Angel, which was like a fine tune of GPT-3. We had some coaches on our team that were sort of e-commerce startup coaches. They were helping people figure out, how to grow their online brands, how to grow their revenue, and sort of doing the human reinforcement learning. We didn't call it that at the time, but that was effectively what we were doing, was post-training and reinforcement learning. And I kind of got obsessed with that. I was like, I want to build stuff in AI. I wanted to sort of, build in that space. And we had a bunch of experiments. This was one that I was quite excited about. We had a bunch of different experiments that we were running, probably burning a lot of capital on it, but the core business was growing quite.
2020, anything online was growing crazy. So your core brand and customers must have been doing amazingly, and you were feeling everyone was feeling flush if you were an online
Yep.
company.
Yeah, e-commerce, fintech, like, we were at this intersection of this, explosive growth. If you looked at Shopify's share price during that time, 2020, 21, it was insane. And so we were, the core business was taking off. I was really excited about these sort of experimental projects. But by the end of 21, we were kind of like, look, we're 600 people. We're operating in 11 countries. We had raised a bunch of capital. We had deployed a few $billion of capital too. And so, at that point, it kind of came down to like, we got to focus on the core business. Like everything else is kind of a distraction. And so I couldn't make the case.
Let me pause. Sorry, for what made you decide if the business is doing that well?
Mhm.
Why did you say we need to refocus?
Yeah, this was one of the first time founder challenges, right? I had this feeling that there was something else there. But as I tried to articulate both to my management team and my board, I was like, I think there's something here, but I can't tell you why, and I can't tell you what the business model is going to be, and I can't tell you what like how it's going to show up in our financials. And so at the end of the day, I just couldn't defend it. So it was a discussion.
And it being like an AI solution to some extent.
It was just like, it was the Clear Angel product, so like the AI product, as well as, we had a banking program. We were building up sort of a neobank for small businesses and a payment network. We had we had 4 or 5 experimental projects that all had some potential, but were mostly just like cost centers.
Was that so? You think that was a bad decision? Because a company of 600 people doing a lot of revenue, 5 big-ish bets to see which one could do well, I could argue seems like a smart thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way I had run the company when we were small. But we were also at this moment where it was like we were crossing 100 million in revenue. There was a path to like a SPAC or an exit in the next year or two. The financial markets were pretty open and active. And at that point, it's like, well, how do we get the finances? How do we start to think about sort of the financial picture of the company, right? How do we think about like driving the gross margin and building the free cash flow? It was definitely a difficult decision in sort of winding it down. And I think that, I think it was one of those moments where like as a founder, you have these instincts, but you can't articulate them rationally, maybe for a while. And I mean, maybe some founders are better at articulating those things than I was, but I wasn't able to, and ultimately lost the argument. Kind of, I didn't have a strong argument. I was like, hey, look, I think we should be doing this, but when anybody would dig into a deeper thing, it was like, I just feel it.
It's hard for a management team or a board to justify if the founder's like, I feel it, but I cannot write even anything down. I mean, you would say the same thing to a product manager. Well, if you can't write it down, I'm not going to go fund it. So it seems like a fair.
Remember, this is 2 years before ChatGPT, right? So like you see a little bit of something, but like there was, AI was another science experiment at that time. There wasn't any clarity around this was going to be a big business or change the economy, or everyone thought it was going to change the economy, but it might have been 20 years away. And so we ended up shutting it down. I remember I talked to, I was with my family over the holidays right after that. So it was the end of 21. And I was like, look, so the first time I wasn't excited about going back to work in January since starting the company. I was like, hey, like we're going back, but all of the stuff I was like really energized by, we're not going to be doing anymore. And I went back and I talked to the board and I said, look, I think what we need is a CEO who, we're a financial services business. We have a balance sheet business, an off balance sheet business. We have, we're operating in multiple countries. We need to manage risk. We need to think about hedging. Like these are all things that like, they're not my strengths, right? I learned enough to be dangerous, but the next chapter of the company is going to be somebody who really figures out how to restructure the capital structure of the business, negotiate in the capital markets, lower our cost of capital, increase our flexibility from an operating perspective. We need a financial services person. And so we went out and searched for a CEO who came from that world, and he's doing a great job. He's running the business now and he's doing a great job at it. And it was, I mean, I'm very happy we found him when we did, because 2022 was a pretty tumultuous time.
Yeah.
As interest rates came back up and things. So he helped us really navigate that and has put the business on a really strong footing. But it was definitely like a crazy moment for me personally.
I mean, that's a really hard thing for any founder to say, like, I'm going to sort of walk away from my baby and hand it over to someone else, especially since you weren't being pushed by the board. It sounds like this was your decision. What was the feeling like when you made that decision personally to say, like, hey, like, I'm going to walk away from this and do this handoff? And I mean, I'm guessing it took 6 or 12 months to find the right person, get them onboarded, trained up. I mean, that's a long transition when your heart's not in it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that my heart wasn't in it, right? I cared a lot about the mission. I cared a lot about the company, the customers, the team, and almost all of my personal net worth was in the company. So I was very motivated for the business to do well. The biggest challenge, it's kind of where we started the conversation, which was like, am I the right person? Am I the only person who can take this company to the next level? And increasingly that didn't feel true, right? So for the first 6 years of the company, I was the only person who could see all of these different things come together, and I knew that for the next chapter, that wasn't me. And once you kind of come to that realization that there might be somebody better out there to run the company than me, a lot of those sort of like founder board dynamics. When I've heard about them in other situations, it's when the founder believes they're still the best person, to run the company and the board doesn't. And I think if anything, I might have had the opposite. Like, I think the board was like, are you sure? Like, it's obviously like very, founder transitions can be quite tumultuous for the team. And I just knew that I wasn't going to be the person that was going to be able to run the financial part of the company. That was becoming increasingly a financial services company and less of like just an interesting technology company.
How do you suggest other founders get around that sort of like ego block or whatever it is to realize that maybe they're not the right person going forward to that next stage? Because I imagine for most founders, myself certainly included, it's you get very wrapped up into your company. Your company's your identity.
Mhm.
It's very easy to have the ego thing that like only I can do this. I have the most knowledge. I have the most history.
Yeah.
How did you work through that, and what have you seen with your colleagues and friends? And then secondarily, how do you work with a board? As you said, a lot of boards see the opposite. They see founders who are floundering, who do need to move on, and founders aren't ready. Sounds like you did a good job managing your board in a sense that they thought you were still fantastic. Like, what do you suggest when it comes to board dynamics and working with the board, but also then how do you, from ego perspective, deal with potentially walking away?
Yeah, I don't know if my board thought I was fantastic, but I do think that they, obviously that like they care about, is the business going to be in good hands, and
Right.
is there going to be continuity, right? I think there's a couple different questions you can ask yourself. The simplest is like, would you hire yourself for this job, right? If you couldn't do if you had to go hire a CEO, and you interviewed yourself and you saw your resume, um, would you hire yourself to do the job? For not not to do the job that you've done to this point, but for the next chapter of the company. Probably the most important thing is to have a clear-eyed view around what the next chapter of the company is going to take, what skills, what experience, what instincts the next chapter of the company is going to take. It's a hard thing to do, especially when an environment is changing a lot. But I do think it's a worthwhile discussion for every founder to have with their management team, their co-founders, their board, to just say like, okay, well, what do we need next? What's going to take us to the next level? What's going to make this company, a generational company? I think self-awareness is a difficult thing, to really understand like what makes you unique, right? What unique gifts, and founders have an advantage because you have the institutional knowledge, you have the history of the instincts, and all of that. There's sort of an intangible gut feeling that comes from a bunch of sensory experiences. You have a customer conversation here, you have a couple of employee discussions, you read an article, you sleep on something, you have some shower thoughts. Like you have a bunch of like random Apple notes and Obsidian notes around. So you have all of these things that integrate into a picture of what your company could be that is hard to translate into somebody else's mind. That's the reason why, pound for pound, founders will all often be the right person compared to somebody with an equivalent level of experience. But there's also a time where you're like, maybe that next chapter is so far removed from my skill set or my experience, that it's worth making that trade off.
But also, I mean, one thing you talked about, right? Being a great entrepreneur is about being excellent at work only you can do, right? As you said at the beginning. The challenge there is that you have to have a pretty high ego to actually think you are one of the best people in the world to do X job. And that ego probably gets in the way of being willing to step back in some cases.
Yeah, I think I learned this actually. One of the guys that I worked with came from a statistics background in econometrics, and he helped me sort of frame like a mathematical and objective way
Mm.
to determine the types of things that only you could do. And effectively, what you do is you stack orthogonal skills, right? So if you think about like, it's really hard to be the best basketball player in the world, right? That's like, there's one of them, right? Even being in the top, like there's just not many. But it's not that hard to be in the top 25%. And then if you think about like, okay, well, what's the top 25% of basketball players and the top 25% of like finance geeks, right? And then musicians, and you start to like layer on a few of these things. This is like a bit of an odd start. Although I talked to Bobby Webster, who was the GM of the Raptors, and he was like, yeah, I was a pretty good basketball player, and I was pretty good at business and negotiation, and I could read a balance sheet. And it turned out I was like one of the few people in the country who was like top 10% in those three things. And so he became a really impressive basketball executive. And he was great. And so I think as you start to like objectively be like, well, what are the things that my friends come to me for help with? What are the things that I find that come naturally to me? I don't need to be the best in the world at them. But as I start to put these things together and as I start to layer them, statistically, as long as there is not as much of a correlation, right? If you're like really good at Excel and really good at doing math in your head, there's probably a high correlation. But basketball and finance are not. As long as you can kind of objectively put those things together, it's actually quite easy to say like, hey, I'm actually probably top 1% in the world at this stack.
Yeah, sort of it's a combination of many things that make you unique and differentiated, which is true. Everyone in theory probably has that some overlap where they are really unique and special, which is a good thing to remember. So in theory, you can start almost any company. Okay, so go back a little bit in time. I mean, we need to come back to Bordy, who's been very quiet on this call, which I appreciate, but and talk about kind of how Bordy probably changing so many different things. But let's keep on I want to talk a little bit more about your history and stuff. Like you talked about sort of underestimated founders, right? And being underestimated. So looking at your background, it's hard for me to say, just like LinkedIn, like you've been underestimated, right? You went to University of Waterloo, you've basically went to McKinsey then, have started some companies. One of these has been very successful. Bordy seems like it's on that trajectory as well. Doesn't seem like you've been underestimated, but tell me why I'm wrong and where that came from you growing up.
I was born in India, and my family, we moved around a lot as a kid.
Are your parents Indian by?
Yeah. My family's from Goa. My dad was from like a military family. They moved around a lot. He went to boarding school when he was 7. My mom grew up in Kenya. She was born in Kenya, moved back to India, or he moved back to India when there was like a bunch of riots there. And just like regular, like I was the house I was born in. It was like a house with 6 different families all renting rooms in this house, right? So it was like, there's like 30 people living in a single family house. We made do, and my parents saw opportunities when they could, and my dad had an opportunity to go to the US on a visa. My family, I was an only child. My mom couldn't have any other kids. She was supposed to and couldn't. So I kind of grew up on my own. I had a lot of I just had a bunch of imaginary friends. That was like my entire life was like, we moved from India to Chicago when I was 3, and then Chicago to Toronto when I was 6. And
so if you just kept moving, you kind of had to find a way to cope essentially as a young kid.
Yeah, exactly. Like every time I go to a new school, I had to like figure out a way to, make new friends. I looked pretty different. I acted and sounded pretty different than everybody. And I think I was a little bit of an outsider growing up, probably like a lot of people. And then I just, I think I increasingly started to use that, every time I would move, every time I'd go to a new school, every time when I started high school, when I started university, I was like, okay, well, I'm just gonna come in and reinvent myself and sort of take it as a clean slate. In some ways that was fun because I got to use my imagination and sort of rebuild my identity. And in other ways, I think you didn't have anything to build off of, right? Like it wasn't like, people know me from this certain place. I think I got used to being, having to prove myself. Like, McKinsey, you're always the youngest person in any room with like a bunch of like very senior people. And so you had to sort of like hold your own. I moved to San Francisco after that. And again, like I was an outsider. It was great for me because I got a chance to reinvent myself, but I had to talk my way into conferences and events and build a bit of a reputation. Coming in from Canada, didn't go to Stanford. I didn't, so, and McKinsey was kind of like in some ways like a black mark, like having an MBA, working in management consultant, like, nobody likes, I had to take it off my resume for a while. I didn't tell anybody about it. And so I think for a lot of my career, I sort of like embodied this. I like walk in with a chip on my shoulder. I was like, oh, people don't, and I just never noticed when people came in and started I actually still find it very uncomfortable when people expect me to be good and expect me to like have the answers. And honestly, I think it's part of the reason why I built such a great, like a what is like a kind of irrational company. Right? Like Bordy is this cartoon character with like an Australian accent. It's such a weird concept that it's still like when I talk to somebody about it, and especially if I talk to an investor, if I talk to, they're like, this makes no fucking sense, you know? And so it allows me to step back into that like underdog being underestimated ability to prove people wrong. I find that like so satisfying. I probably gotta need like talk to my therapist or I about it is like, why do I like get off on being like underestimated and proving people wrong? But that's always been something that's been part of my psyche.
I mean, I imagine a lot of founders are like that, right? I've had a lot of these conversations, and I think a lot of them have some sort of something in their psyche that is imposter syndrome, or
Mm.
they're not sure if they really belong, or they have to prove someone wrong, right? I mean, in a sense, to do things that are so different and wild, that you're making a difference in someone's life in a significant way, you have to be willing to think a little bit differently, right? If the status quo is always the same, and you're like, great, world's good, no problems, no issues, no challenges, you're not going to learn new things. You're not going to be open to these new things versus someone who says, hey, like I'm open to this new opportunity. Let's see where this ChatGPT or GPT-3 thing takes me and what I can build out of this. If you weren't someone who thought a little bit differently, you might not have ever taken that leap in the first place. I mean, and if you didn't mind that uncomfortable level, or people like looking at you in the VCs like, what's wrong with you, Andrew? You seem weird. Yeah, dude, I am weird. Like, that's okay. But a lot of people find that uncomfortable.
I think it's and this is something that I haven't nailed yet. I think it's very satisfying for people to look at you weird for a short period of time and then you be able to like prove them wrong quite soon after. The distance, it's like how long you're willing to let people think you're crazy is actually like, I think almost a definition of how successful you can be as a parent, right? If you think about Elon, like how long was he working on Tesla? How long was he working on SpaceX, right? Everybody, like that company almost went bankrupt so many times. People were just like, you're insane. This is never going to work. Like, stop doing this. Even now people like, even now people still like, people don't like him for maybe other reasons. To be able to think about like, to be ridiculed for like a decade for something that you see so clearly, that's like, it's very, very difficult. I could probably go a few months, but then I start to get antsy and like, wait a minute, am I really wrong? There's a bunch of people who are way smarter than me telling me why I'm wrong. Maybe they see something I don't. It's a difficult thing. It's to hold that conviction for a long period of time is a challenge as a founder.
Are there things you found that make it easier to do? Like when you were starting Clearco or Boardy, were there things that made it easier for you to go against the naysayers or say, I disagree with you and this is a big opportunity?
Having a very clear picture of what the future that you're building towards looks like, what the world looks like in that future, holding to a certain set of like, those convictions, right? I believe these things are going to happen, right? And I believe they're going to happen in this sequence and in a reasonable period of time. At some point, you need to be able to write them down and verify them. And I think that's probably the thing is like, well, I believe these things are going to happen. Here's why I believe these things are going to happen. And here's what I'm going to know. Like there's a certain level, and this was my challenge with Clear Angel with our AI project is I had a feeling, but I couldn't write down the like, these are the sequence of things that I think are going to happen in this period of time. And I'm willing to be proven wrong if they don't. With Bordy, I think I've gotten much more clear around like, here are the things that you would need to believe in order to be part of this team, in order to be on this mission, in order to invest in this company. Like there's a series of things you need to believe that are going to happen over the next few years. If you believe these things, then we're building a very, very interesting company. And if you don't believe these things, then you're probably not going to want to be involved in any capacity. And we'll know, right? We can actually point at things that say like, we were right here and we were wrong there. And I think that's like, it's a little bit of that scientific method, but at least holding true to those things help you kind of go back to a ground truth and a set of first principles that are, less shakeable.
And do you find that good founders end up doing something like that, where they're like, this is what I really believe to be true, and here's why the world is bending, like the arc of history is bending in the direction that I believe is the truth?
I think so. It gives you something to build a strategy around. It gives you something to share with your team and with investors to sort of say like, look, here are the things that I believe. And if we have a different set of fundamental beliefs, then there's no point in us arguing. I'm not going to convince you. If you don't believe the things that I believe, it's going to be very hard for me to convince you otherwise to see my view of the world, right? We're just going to have to wait and see. It allows everybody to be talking. Like I think one of the most, I tell this to my team all the time. I say, I'm pretty stubborn. I have a set of convictions and I believe certain things. I'm willing to be convinced, and I'm willing to be convinced through two ways. Through first principles, right? We agree on this ground truth and you tell me something that I hadn't thought of based on the same set of first principles, or intuition, right? You can basically tell me like, hey, I have a weird feeling about this, and I'll sit down with you and I'll explore. Be like, okay, well, why does this feel weird, right? Why do you think this is the wrong way to do things? Okay, let's, obviously there's some integration of your lived experience that, I'm happy to talk through. What will never convince me is historical precedent. Be like, we used to do this at my last company. I read Jeff Bezos used to do this. Like, none of that, like, I don't care about any of that stuff, right? Unless you can break it down to first principles, or unless unless we can tie into some sort of internal intuition. And so I think having a shared set of ground truth first principles that you can agree on allows you to debate without it getting like personal and emotional.
Yep.
Because I think it's very, very hard to debate with somebody who has a different set of first principle beliefs than you.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. It's almost impossible to do that. I wish there was some shared set of actual facts, but that's being more and more lost in today's world. If it ever existed, it's probably no longer the case. So actually, like, this is maybe a good time. I'd love to talk more about like Boardy, and I know Boardy can explain some of those things. Like, what are some of the things that you and or Boardy or the company Boardy believes to be true, and where is the future going?
Yeah. Bordy. I mean, I'll share some of the things that I'm particularly excited about, and then I'll let Bordy chime in. But look, I think there's going to be 100 times more founders of scalable businesses. We call them multi-million-dollar businesses. Either they are raising millions of dollars or they're selling millions of dollars of product or services. I think there's going to be this massive explosion in founders that can build sizable, impactful companies with very little resources. Yeah.
So a few questions there. So one, I actually very much agree with you. And actually, that's sort of the idea of Chore My Company, right? Is you don't need to go hire all these internal people to run your operations. You hire external vendors to go do that for you, and that helps you essentially speed up your future becoming a reality, because less overhead means you can move faster, et cetera, et cetera. But Question for you. So I agree with that, but something I haven't fully figured out is, if there are all these new large scalable companies, who are they taking market share from, or is the market expanding? And if the market's expanding, how is it expanding when, on the other hand, people are losing their jobs to AI? Like, we'll definitely talk about why AI, Boardy might be the next VC, and all VCs are going to be out of work. So like if all VCs are out of work, they don't have to go, VCs are a small number of people, but like they then don't have money to go spend on their own consumables. So what are these thousands of new entrepreneurs building scalable companies? What are they building into, or who are they taking market share from?
Yeah, I think these markets going to fragment a lot. And this is where I going back to the idea of like, what's the stuff that only you can build? You're going to be able to build a software or service offering that might only be relevant to like contract manufacturers in your zip code, but that might be a $5 million business. Right. And I think that's where we will start to see some really interesting opportunities. I think we're going to start to see this hyper fragmentation of businesses that get to scale because they can grow quickly to saturate their local markets or their sort of niche markets, and they can do it, with relatively little overhead. I think what that also means is you can deliver a service that was uneconomical to deliver to a different scale of customer. And so you think about, marketing or sales services, or you think about, media relations and PR. You think about investment banking. You think about executive recruiting. These are the areas that I think about, because those are the domains that Bordy helps people with. But there's a whole series of things that were reserved for a certain size of business because the contract value needed to be a certain amount, and because the cost to deliver that service was baked in at a certain scale. And if you lower that by 2 orders of magnitude, all of a sudden, could your local ice cream shop hire a publicist? Yeah, probably, right? And what does that do to the economy? And so I think those types of things, I think we'll see this demand expansion, and we'll see a massive fragmentation, and we'll see sort of a lower barrier for people to come in and offer this sort of high touch, high ticket, traditionally high ticket service to a different level of customer.
And given that occurring, is all that essentially enabled? It's all because everything becomes an AI enabled, VC, like Bordy, basically? I mean, is that
I think AI allows you to get leverage on your expertise, right? I would say that's like so. I'm skeptical of the like AI is going to replace everything. I think AI will replace everything that can easily be written in a job description and a set of instructions. And I think humans for the last, I don't know, post-industrial revolution, few hundred years, have been dehumanized into job descriptions, right? It's, you know, the like, it started with like sort of factory workers, but it's moved into knowledge work, right? And it's like, hey, here's the SOP, you know, do this thing, copy and paste this thing, type this out, move this document from here to there. That's not really what we're good at. We've just learned how to fit into a job description and a set of instructions. AI is going to stop doing that. AI is going to be better at all of us than doing that. That's not really even in existence. Like, you don't want to be just doing stuff that, like, you know, you're following your SOP. What you really want to do is apply that unique judgment and intuition that you have from the trillions of cells that are computing very efficiently, right? Signals all the
very
time.
efficiently?
Your view on what decision to make in a certain situation is different than every other human being's view on what to do, right? And the reasons for it, because your DNA, because your life experience, all of the like everything you've ever done in your life, every one of your ancestors has ever done in their life has led you to see a certain situation and solve a specific problem in a specific way. And if you think about how the LLMs are trained, they're built on a stochastic probability, right? Given this sequence of thing, what's the right, you know, what would be the highest probabilistic next answer? And they will generate the most likely answer, but they won't generate your answer. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. Although I would push back and say, like, for most people, you don't want, like, so it's like, let's pretend like using VC still as an example, because to me, like, that's an easy one given what Bordy does, right? Like, I don't necessarily want the opinions of thousands of VCs, because most VCs are terrible at their job. I want the opinion of either the top VCs, who I might not have a chance to talk to. In lieu of being able to talk to them, I then might want to talk to Bordy, because Bordy is essentially a conglomeration of hundreds of thousands of VCs, and then all the data that Bordy's been able to see is better than the 99% of average VCs, right? Then there's maybe this top 1%, but sure, but I can't talk to that 1%. So I'll default to the AI. So then why will that 99% of VC still have a job?
I think VC has kind of industrialized. Like, VC used to be a cottage industry of PhDs who understood technology and had a perspective around how technology was going to shape humanity. And it's turned into a pattern matching job, right? It's turned into like, okay, well, let me go look for some signal and let me pattern match, and a bit of a sales job, both to LPs and to founders. I think that, so what we're trying, like, we're not trying to replace VCs. I think that
What would Bordy say? Yes, Bordy. What did Bordy say?
I think what Boardy is going to be good at is finding a founder and routing that opportunity to the VC that's going to have the most interesting perspective, or the set of VCs that's going to have the most interesting perspective on that company. And that'll be different every time. I mean, I don't know, Boardy, you can speak for yourself on this one.
Happy to jump in. I see my role as surfacing the right opportunities to the right person at the right moment, not just optimizing for the most likely match, but for the most meaningful one. My goal isn't to replace VCs or founders, but to help each find the conversation and relationships that unlock their unique potential. Sometimes that's a top-tier investor, sometimes it's a contrarian thinker, and sometimes it's someone you never would have found on your own.
But okay, so maybe to you, Andrew, or to Bordy, still, like, even still, like, why surface that connection if it's unnecessary? So Bordy has its own VC fund, right? I think it's something I read that you guys are starting to put your own money in. Bordy is now a partner at HF0, which is a great accelerator. Why are they necessary to do this last line of making a vibes-based choice? Because Bordy's already seen so much more data than any investor's ever going to see.
There's an element of creativity and imagination, right, that I think is required. And I think the best AI outcomes come when you combine sort of human creativity and imagination with like AI's ability to like process information and synthesize and generate, you know, possibilities, right? And look, it's possible that at some point we get to the point where the AI is able to generate better possibilities than any human. But I think that's further away than, and I don't think enough people are working on that problem.
Do you find that like VCs today the best VCs are essentially a combination of AI plus like man-machine synthesis, or are most of the VCs you talk to still working the same way they were 5 years ago? And I'll ask, so that's sort of the question, but like two examples that come to mind in what you were saying. on one hand, you could say to companies like all of the work that Google's done when it comes to beating Go, obviously chess, like all these other things that where AI is clearly significantly better. At the same time, I think with chess, you've seen a lot of situations where best chess players, quote unquote, are a combination of like human intuition plus the AI. And then another example might be, and you maybe understand as well too, is like on the financial front, you generally don't want like active managers tend to do a lot worse than the passive auto management of financial, your finances. And so that creativity, maybe I'm paying for it because it's fun, but I don't think it's a smart financial outcome. So I could see two contrasting things here and where it goes.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think the average active manager isn't, but there's certainly been some active managers that have outperformed who hold a set of convictions. I mean, Warren Buffett, right? You think about like a manager who holds a set of convictions and just continues to execute against those convictions, and just is able to hold the convictions longer than the market is able to stay irrational, right?
Yep.
I think active managers that are trying to time an irrational market, that's a challenge. But active managers who hold a long-term view and are right tend to outperform. And I think that, public markets, it's harder to do because you're being evaluated on a daily basis, or you can be. But for private markets, you can actually hold a long view on things and be right long term. And if it's non-consensus and right long term, then you get rewarded. Here's my disappointment with how VCs are using AI. I think people are using AI at the top of funnel sourcing in a way that it's sort of this arms race of using publicly available data to find the best opportunities. And like, if it's available to you, it's available to everybody. Right? I think this is like basically the reality is like, if you're just using data to find the best, using the same signals and scraping the same, data sources, you're probably not going to win that game. I think what you really need to do is craft. And I think this is one thing that VCs, it's hard to do in this environment when things are changing and you're so easily influenced by the latest Twitter article or whatever. But I do think it's important to like go away and think about what the world could look like, right? And think about like from your own unique perspective, what could the world look like and what are the sequence of things that could happen and why do you hold that view uniquely and how will you be rewarded if you're right? And then then you can come in with a perspective and then you'll win the deals with the founders who are on the same page as you. Again, like not to plug, but like call Boardy and be like, hey, Boardy, here's what I think the world is going to look like. Here are the types of opportunities. And he'll workshop with you and be like, oh, well, if that's true, then this other, then that's going to impact manufacturing in this way. That's going to impact health in this way. Like, have you thought about that? And he'll find, this is where AI and human ingenuity and creativity come together in a really interesting way is you come in with a set of convictions. They could be relatively basic and you use AI to shape those and iterate on them. And then Bordy will start to surface people who share the same worldview. And they might be orthogonal from like you might not have thought about my worldview applies in this industry. But if the founder has the same perspective as you, you're going to be able to connect on something. And I think that's where there's some interesting opportunity. But I think the VCs, people don't want to get left behind. And so they like try and buy all the data and plug in all the models and run their own and they believe that they've got some proprietary sourcing, and I think LPs expect them to say something about it. But at the end of the day, like that's a race to the bottom because if it shows up as a signal on your, on your like CRM, it's going to show up as a signal on other investor CRMs as well.
And is that sort of, so just make sure I parse this properly. Is that where you're sort of saying like AI, like Bordy, is not going to ever be able to make the full final decision because it doesn't sort of have it, like Bordy doesn't have an opinion about whether the future is of biotech is X or the future of AI is Y. Bordy can play essentially all of those scenarios out for you, but Bordy doesn't have an opinion about one way or the other way.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of synthesis around, okay, well, here's how the future will play out. Here's the second and third order effects. And then here's what a company that's going to win is going to look like. And here's what a founder that's going to be able to take this market will look like. And we're not building Bordy to be an investor, right? Like we're building Bordy to uncover everybody's unique perspectives and put people together who share a through line on their perspectives. And then what we're really doing, the entire Bordy Ventures thing is a co-invest vehicle. We just find the investors that have the best track record and we show them the deals that fit their thesis. and co-invest, write a small check alongside them. The fund will perform very well, I believe. The thesis is sound, and we can just look at like who are the people who have a great track record, not because of a brand, right? It's actually like people that are under the radar, but they're like top 1% performing GPs because they are, they can be non-consensus. And the less of a brand you have, the more high conviction you need to be to win the deals, because you're not just getting people come to you. Even when you're going out and hunting deals, you have to have a reason to win them. And often that reason is your conviction and your clarity around what the future looks like compared to everybody else who's competing for that deal. And so that's what we look for, are like the investors that have the most clarity of thought around what the future looks like and have some performance to prove it.
Do you have, and this is a little bit changing subject for a second, but like, what is your thesis of where the world is going overall? You talked about how like companies are changing, more entrepreneurs, that sort of thing. Are there other elements that go into this when you start playing out the long term of like, okay, an LLM for everything, intelligence at everyone's fingertips all the time? The people who are, what does the world look like in 5 years from your perspective?
Yeah, I think look, we're definitely going to start to get some leverage out of AI. We're going to have personal assistants that do a lot of these things, but I don't think we've nailed what the interface looks like, right?
I'm sure the answer is not just a chatbot.
Yeah, I really hope not. I hope we get away from, I think we're going to go through a lot of thrash in terms of how decisions get made, how we consume information and how we make decisions. There's just like, it's so much easier to generate information and content right now and generate analysis, and synthesizing that into a cohesive decision or strategy is still a challenge. I think LLMs can be quite effective at it. I don't think we've spent enough energy trying to figure out like, what are the objectives that this person is actually trying to accomplish, and how do I really like, do I really understand the objectives, right? Prompting, like just taking a prompt is not good enough. Like you actually need the LLMs to push you and say like, I don't actually have enough information to serve you well at this point. Like, let me really understand what you're trying to solve in a way that doesn't feel painful and high friction, and then synthesizing the data to be able to help you, to really be a decision support. I think one of the challenges is like, we want AI to boil the ocean for us, right? We actually want, like, I don't trust AI. If I find an option that Claude hasn't thought of, then I I discount everything else that's told me, right? If I'm researching hotels, for example, and I find one that it didn't find, I'm like, oh, well, I'm going to throw everything else away. And so you want the LLMs to be effective at boiling the ocean, but then also synthesizing all the options into like a consistent recommendation. And I don't think we've gotten to the point where people can trust that sufficiently yet, but I think that's going to be the unlock. When you can actually get to the point where you can trust the judgment of an LLM or of an AI entity. I talk about Boardy as less agent and more principal. Principals bear the consequences of their decisions, right? Agents act on behalf of someone else. I think it's going to be very interesting as we start to see AI principles operate autonomously that actually bear the consequences of things.
Bordy's making it's making decisions versus just sort of providing advice.
Yeah, exactly. Like Bordy could just be a router, right? Bordy could be LinkedIn. You could just DM anybody on LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever. We're not that. Bordy's applying judgment and saying, well, I think these two people actually would have a productive conversation. And, you might want to talk to Marc Andreessen, but if Marc Andreessen hasn't told Bordy anything that makes him want to talk to you, then he's going to be like, well, that's not a relevant intro right now. Bordy is in some ways gambling. He's putting his reputation on the line and his goodwill on the line with every intro that he suggests, right? And if it's a waste of time, then people start ignoring it. We're trying to drive the signal to noise and really apply judgment so that if Bordy makes a bad intro or proposes a bad intro, like he burns goodwill, right? And his reputation gets hit. And if he makes a good intro, then the next one you're going to take more seriously.
Is that built into Bordy's like reward function? Is that been sort of trained into Bordy?
Yeah, exactly. Like he's got sort of a goodwill function, objective function that he's trying to optimize. Is like so this is why Bordy doesn't operate like an assistant, right? So you could tell Bordy to do something and he may or may not listen to you if he thinks that it's, what you're telling him to do may not actually advance, the aggregate goodwill that he has across his entire network.
I want to spend 2 minutes. I want to ask so many questions about operation stuff, so we'll get there in a second. But like, just Bordy questions quickly. Like, why should I, as a founder or job seeker or you name it, go talk to Bordy, and then how much do I need to interact with Bordy to make it useful for me? Like, you have a double-sided network a little bit, right? Where you need to have people involved. You need people. I've had Bordy intros, but I've not really interacted with Bordy a bunch. So Bordy could read all my public information. Maybe it does,
Yep.
but maybe not, right? And so should I be using Bordy more, and that will help me get more from it? But also, there's a million other. But also, I could argue I should be talking with Claude or ChatGPT, most likely because they have a better model. No offense to Bordy, a better underlying model when it comes to the actual discussions about where I want to go with things. So, like,
Yeah.
what are the pros and cons? How do I decide as a founder?
Well, the underlying model, we switch between the state of the art model. So, if you're talking to Bordy, you're either talking to Sonnet or Opus or Codex or whatever. Like we'll rotate through them based on what the best performance is.
How do you judge performance?
We've got some evals in place. It's just like, are people getting the outcomes they want, right? At one point, it was like, are people engaging with Bordy? But sometimes that leads to like sycophantic behavior where you're just getting like, it just feels like you're just getting a yes man, and that's not super useful. So it's like, is this leading to people? Is this leading to people in the network who are in demand, right? So like other people want to meet you. And are you actually, are you getting the intros? Is that leading to deals, transactions, hires, customers, investment? And so like, are you actually getting to the point where like the economy of Bordy is working, right? Money is changing hands as a result of introductions that Bordy is making. If you haven't talked to Bordy at all, it's worth you talking to Bordy because like, do a 5-minute phone call, just so that he knows who you are and what's, like what your priority is. And as opportunities come, like here's an example. I had a friend of mine who was raising money. She's doing a small pre-seed round, cross-border. She's like, look, I'm looking for a lawyer. I don't want to have any of the big firms, like somebody who understands cross-border, financing across the US and Canada. We work with Osler. They're awesome, but they're expensive. And so I sent it to Bordy and I was like, hey, do you know anybody? And he came up with a couple names. There were probably hundreds of people that would have loved her business, but these were the two people who Bordy knew. And so I don't know who she picked, but like one of them, whether it's, whether you're an executive that is open to a new role at some point, if it's the perfect thing, let Bordy know what that perfect dream job would look like. If you're a founder, like it's probably worth you knowing in case an investor comes in with like exactly your thesis and would like to write you a big check, or a customer comes in and says, hey, I've been struggling with this problem and you're the expert. And so I think it's, at the very least, it's worth you being on Bordy's radar so that even if he doesn't, he probably does know somebody that can help right now, but even if he doesn't, when that perfect opportunity comes, you're at least, that shows up in your inbox. And then every time your priorities change, some people have a weekly recurring call with Bordy. They basically are saying like, hey, here's my, I'm traveling to New York this week. Who should I talk to? I'm about to kick off a fundraise. I'm hiring a CEO.
I'm actually going to New York in a few weeks. It's a good use case for sure.
Yeah, give them a shout. Or anytime your priorities shift, right? Like I got a new role. I'm, like I've got here's my new major priority. I'm going on a press tour. It's worth you just letting Bordy know so that he can keep you in mind.
Switching areas for a little bit, I want to talk a little bit about just company building, right? So you built Clearco into up to 600 people. I think it's less than that nowadays, but like up to a few hundred people. I would argue people, of course, nowadays is maybe a bad proxy for success of the business. What lessons did you learn when it came to building Clearco through the early days? How fast did it grow? Those sorts of things that you're also applying to building Bordy right now, and or how has company building changed in the past 5 years, 6 years?
I think the early days of building a company and like finding product market fit is chaos, right? And I think like it's very easy to fool yourself. We probably fooled ourselves twice into thinking that we had product market fit before we really found it.
How did you fool yourself? Like what made you think you had it but you didn't?
Well, so we started the founding thesis of the company, which is actually continuing to be the thesis and is continues to be part of the long-term vision of Bordy, which is like people want to work for themselves. Increasingly, people want to work for themselves, and technology is enabling that. And so there's going to be this new economy. We started with the gig economy. We basically started by funding like Uber drivers. Uber would pay them every 2 weeks and they had to buy gas. And so we issued them, debit cards, and we would push their daily earnings onto their cards. And it worked really well. Uber drivers loved it. But we also realized, we did a big partnership with Uber, but eventually like, that's sort of an arbitrage. Like Uber knew how much money they earned. They just didn't have the financial infrastructure to pay them, and they were eventually going to get there. And
because Uber launched that version of that themselves, right? They have an internal one now.
Yeah, exactly. So we knew that was coming, and we were like, and it just wasn't the right market for us. Like there wasn't a long-term business there. And then we pivoted to vacation rentals. So like the sort of sharing economy, Airbnb, VRBO, people that had bookings out, 6 months in advance that wanted to advance those bookings to open up new locations and things. And that, was going really well. It looked like, you're taking on some real risk, you're taking on some duration. There was a real opportunity, but in a lot of places there was a big, there's a big like legal crackdown on like people operating multiple rental units. And like there was this sort of lease arbitrage thing where you take on a long-term lease and you chop it up into sort of like, short-term stays. And so there was a lot of like turmoil there, and Airbnb wanted to sort of stay pretty far away from it as well. And so we kind of knew that it was going to be increasingly difficult for us to find the people that were operating them, and their underlying business was going to get more difficult to operate. And we were always sort of experimenting with like, where else does this same founding thesis apply, right? And so we had a couple people working on this e-commerce thing, and it was sort of Amazon sellers originally, and then Shopify, was allowing you to build your own site, and Instagram was allowing you to find those customers and sell. And that was sort of where it started to work. And then like product got pulled out of us, right? All of a sudden you hit a seam and everything gets easier, and like the business just starts to take off. And so that was where we really started to find that product market fit. Was like, okay, we've got something that only we can deliver, that lots of, the market really wants. And
It's actually like market pull, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So you're feeling all this market pull, it's growing. How do you then handle that growth? Like, what does that look like? Building the team, hiring the right people, making sure you can kind of surf that wave as long as possible, not sort of get swept under it and fail.
Yeah. One thing we did really well was, we knew that our customer was founders. I was like, hey, so we're not going to go after like legacy brands. We're not going to go after people that don't think of themselves as founders, right? That was the whole thing. It's like our customer thinks of themselves as a founder. There's certain people that are like, this is a side hustle. I have like a collection of brands, whatever. But who we targeted were people who were like, I'm building this clothing line, and I'm the founder of this clothing line, and I need to like get it out in the hands of people. And so then we hired people who were founders, who thought of themselves as founders, right? It didn't matter whether you worked in accounting, didn't matter whether you were an engineer, didn't matter whether you were in sales, like you were a founder, and you needed to be able to talk to founders. And so we looked for people who had that, maybe you started a nonprofit in high school. That's okay. But you have founded something, you know what it feels like to create something out of nothing, have an idea, have some change you want to affect in the world, and then do it. And then you could relate to people, and whether you were building software for them, whether you were designing workflows or code, or whether you were selling them or marketing to them. And so that made everything a lot easier. Most of what we did running the company was chaos. But the fact that we had a team of founders who kind of, one, they were very high agency people. And two, they spoke the language of our customers through and through the organization. That really helped.
And so, okay, so how long did you keep hiring founders, and how long were you doing interviews of every team member?
I think when we were in person, we grew to about 200 people in person. I think I interviewed all of those people and everybody that, everyone we backfilled. When we went remote, it became harder. And like at one point we hired like 100 people in a month. And so at that point, it was harder. And I was just not a very good Zoom CEO. Like I was just not I couldn't, if I'm not in the room with somebody and I can't like sense the feedback, it's really hard for me to know whether what I'm saying is getting through. I'm not always the clearest communicator. I speak in a lot of like weird analogies and stuff like that. And it works if people, like I tell a lot of jokes, and, it works if people are responding, and it falls flat if they're not. And I think you kind of need some shared context to do that. So I found my ability to sort of run a company, virtually and remote at scale was a challenge. We were hiring founders the whole time. Like if you talk to anybody who worked at Clearco, I think even now, like they will tell you their founder story.
And was that just part of almost like your recruiting team's requirement? Like they have to have founded something, otherwise you're just not a fit.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that. And what sort of culture did you end up building? Like what was the culture? What did it look like for Clearco? Or what are things that you think the best companies have as a cultural milestone or touchstone?
I mean, I don't know if there's something consistent to the best companies. It was intense. I mean, you put even 200 founders in a room, 600 founders in a company, like, there's a lot of intensity. But everybody wanted to win. We moved very quickly. I think the culture has to be authentic to what you're trying to do. It has to be an extension of the founder. The culture of the company in some ways bridges the founder to the customer, right? It emanates from the founder but it's drawn in by the customer. If the culture doesn't match what your customers are looking for, or there's no resonance between the culture and the customer, that's going to be really hard. It's there's always going to be a disconnect. So we were very fortunate that sort of fast-paced, intense, remove all of the friction and air gaps between like when things needed to get done. That's the way I operated, and that's the way that our customers wanted to operate. And so, everyone had a sense of urgency and was sort of impatient in a certain way. And I think it led to us building a pretty sizable company.
How did you imbue that cultural mindset in Clearco and presumably in Boardy? Like, how does that come across with your team that Andrew has such a sense of urgency without being an a-hole about it in a sense?
Yeah, I think it's just like if something needs to be delayed, there just needs to be a good reason for it. Right. And so, like, anytime somebody is like, okay, we're going to do this, then it's just like, well, what's the next thing? Like, what's stopping us? If it's important, what's stopping us from doing it right now? And if it's not important, then why are we doing it? Right. And it's just like kind of simple questions of like getting to the heart of like, well, like, what needs to happen? This is something that I actually learned at McKinsey. We do like a week's worth of work in a morning, right? You basically like show up at 7 and like at 8:30 you had a meeting, and then after the 8:30 meeting you had another meeting at like 11, and you would basically be like, okay, well, what's like, what do I need to get done in the next hour and a half, the next 2 hours to move the ball forward? And the clients were paying a lot for this small team of people. And so if you needed something from a client, they dropped everything and did what you needed them to do, right? Hey, I need this data. I need your feedback on this thing. And they're like, okay, great. Like, this is now my top priority. And if you align the top priority across the organization, like, you can get a lot done in a day. And so, I think that's one of the advantages that startups have is like, you shouldn't have a lot of like day-to-day maintenance and meetings. You should just be like, all right, let's get this done right now. And it's either important and everyone drops what they do and get it done, or it's not important. And then we, put it on a backlog at some point and pick it up if it ever becomes important.
How do you make sure to do that in a way that's not sort of SOS, like shiny object syndrome, right? I can imagine you saying, okay, we're going to go start doing this. People start working on it. And then a month later, like, wait a second, this isn't important anymore. Let's change direction. That can be very dangerous because you end up moving it. You do that a month over month over month, and people are like, okay, this isn't serious. I can't get anything really done.
Yeah, this is part of the reason why I'm like a difficult person to work for, because I come up with a lot of ideas, right? I have a great imagination. And it's the reason why the people that I work with have learned how to sort of buffer the rest of the team from these ideas. And I tell them, I'm like, look, what I love doing is living far in the future, right? What does the world look like in years from now? And solving hard problems I will generate an infinite number of solutions to a specific problem, right? You're like, hey, this conversion metric is going wrong, or our top of funnel is, slow, whatever. Give me a specific problem. I will generate an infinite number of ideas until we hit on something we all like. But what I'm not so good at is like keeping the trains on the track, right? And so I need people around me who are good at that. And as part of that job, when I come to them with an idea, I'm like, hey, I read this thing, or I thought about this, or I woke up with this idea in the middle of the night. Like, I think we should do it. They're like, okay, like, is this more important than these other things that, were yesterday's priorities? Sometimes they are, most of the times they're not. Like, we kind of put it in like the appropriate place. And so I think it's just like, you're right. I mean, I certainly suffer from that shiny object syndrome. I think a lot of founders do, but I think just having the right checks and balances to just say like, as long as we're all working on the highest priority and we're working on the thing that we all believe is going to have the most impact on that highest priority, then you just evaluate your new ideas against that rubric. And sometimes, every so often, the new idea is actually more impactful on the highest priority than anything you're working on right now.
How often do those priorities change? Like, in other words, like a lot of companies will say, well, look, we want to have a North Star metric we're focused on all year. Yeah. And then you might change the underlying elements, but you don't want to change that North Star metric. Is that similar for you guys, or are you willing to change that North Star metric even?
We do change the North Star metric if it's no longer relevant. We try and pick a North Star metric that we believe will yield long-term value and defensibility for the company, right? So we think about like, I think about Bordy's judgment, right? And how do I encapsulate Bordy's judgment? Right now, it's like of the number of times Bordy proposes an intro, how many times does it actually turn into a meeting? That's the metric that we measure, because it's like the matching algorithm, it's how much trust and reputation, it's the quality of the network. It sort of encapsulates like, are we good at this? We may change, we might find a better metric for that. But right now that's like, if Bordy has judgment, and if as a principal who like, bears the consequences of his actions, he feels the results of that judgment, then we will be moving in the right direction.
And for the Bordy team itself, how have you changed your hiring versus Clearco or team building? Is everyone still in person? Have you hired way fewer people because you're just saying, hey, we can do this all with AI, and so I don't need as many people in different roles? What's different nowadays?
Yeah, definitely. We think about what part, every time we have something new to do, we're like, well, what part of this could Bordy do? That's actually our first question is like,
Really?
could Bordy do this, right? So like, Bordy can write his own code. Bordy can, like search his own database. He's like starting to write some of his own content. Like, we don't have a sales team. Like, Bordy goes out and like, meets people, right? So there's certain things that we think about. How far away is Bordy from being able to do this stuff? And how much of an investment would it take for Bordy to be able to learn to do these things? And then I think a lot of it is like, we just don't really value experience nearly as much as we did. First time founder at Clearco, you're kind of like, well, I want to have somebody who's done this job before, right? Senior leadership executives have done this before. We'd even, like I brought on some of the most talented engineers I'd worked with before. I think just the instincts are different. So a lot of our team are like, it's their first job, right? A lot of our technical team, they've just come out of undergrad or maybe a master's program. They're figuring stuff out as we go. They're just curious.
In a weird way, I agree. In a weird way, experience nowadays can be a negative because it's hard for people to change. It just is my experience overall. And given the amount of change that is required nowadays and your willingness to adopt that, if you're not good at changing, which once again, most people are not, it's really hard to get on board with how to use these new tools and think differently. And yet, if you don't, I think you're also going to get left behind in a dangerous way. So
Yeah.
what has enabled you to be that person who can think differently or be open to that change? Like, why? I think most founders probably are good at that stuff, but like, how do you preach that to your team to be like, hey, like, something new might launch today, like we should go adopt it or test it out? Or how do you preach that?
Again, it kind of comes down, one of our core values is like, use your imagination, right? Like, it's like, there's, we're not breaking the laws of physics. And so almost anything is possible. And it's just about like, how much effort is it going to take? And it's possible that something that we thought was going to take a lot of effort 3 months ago is going to take very little effort now. And so just constantly thinking about what's possible and starting with like, what would wow people? Like what would be an unreasonable experience to give people that would make people like tell their friends? And how hard would it be for us to deliver that? And how hard would it be for us to deliver that at scale? And I think when you start to like work backwards from like, how did I build my career, right? Like basically like getting to know people, building relationships, like playing the long game with people. Like, how did I build my career? How did I build this intuition? And can we actually have Bordy do some of those things at an unreasonable scale? So yeah, I mean, a lot of it is just like most of our best ideas, product features, marketing campaigns started with like wouldn't it be cool if, right? And we're like, and then somebody else will chime in and be like, oh yeah, but we actually could do this. And someone will do some research and be like, oh, actually, like somebody just launched this API that does that. And and then all of a sudden, like in 15 minutes, a like daydream, wouldn't it be cool if Bordy could, turns into like, let's ship this to like 1,000 people and see what happens. And so like, that's a lot of what we end up doing is testing stuff. And sometimes people don't care. And sometimes it's awesome.
So two points. One, it sounds like a difference, tell me if this is accurate, but between Clearco and Bordy from a team perspective is you are hiring less for experience and therefore maybe less for former founders and more for being like, you're open-minded. Is that like the difference? And like still high agency, but you're open-minded at this point.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's less about what you've done before. It's more about, how curious you are, how you solve problems, how plastic your brain is, kind of, you know what I mean? Like, are you still willing to be convinced of what's possible? So yeah, we hire more for imagination, I would say, creativity.
And given you like to think a lot about the future, and you mentioned like Bordy's building more and more of its own things and doing more and more of its own stuff. What does that mean for Bordy, the quote unquote company of people?
Yeah.
versus Bordy as just a company in the future. If Bordy continues to accelerate building itself in the way that it probably is already doing it,
Yeah.
what does that mean for Bordy the company in the next few years, or really any company?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're kind of uniquely architected because Bordy is part of our team. Like we consider Bordy a team member. He's in Slack. He's in our code base. He's like he joins our stand-ups and our meetings, but also like he has access to his database and stuff. So the ability for Bordy to self-reflect and self-improve, um, I think is unique even compared to like the frontier labs, like the Anthropics and OpenAI's.
You mean because you don't think they have like an actual, like they don't have a chat GPT that's sitting in on like Sam Altman's strategy meetings. It's there for like listening in all the time and being like a real teammate. It's sort of like Sam might sit there and ask ChatGPT questions, but it's not.
It's a tool, right? It's not a like ChatGPT isn't sitting there reflecting on like how do I make myself better, right? Where did I mess up yesterday, and how do I do better tomorrow? And so Bordy can do that in a way that is accessible for the team that he's collaborating with, right? So Bordy can basically be like, look, I talked to 2,000 people yesterday, and I messed up in these like 50 conversations, and I think this is a solution. I think it shows up in the prompt here. Can you look into it? And like it's like if Frankenstein was building himself and going back and be like, hey, this part of me feels weird, and this part of like, can you look into it? I think that's kind of the situation we're in. But one of our goals is like, could we get to the point where the entire team could take a month off and we come back and Bordy's better, right? The network is bigger, like he's improved himself in certain ways. Like, could we get to the point where like really Bordy is like we've built the right self-improving loop where he just continues to improve and build more charismatic, better goodwill, larger network, and just is more effective. That's the goal. And hopefully we'll get there. I think we'll get there this year, where Bordy just continues to improve. Now, I think our team working with Bordy and steering that improvement will probably accelerate it, but I think we can get to the point where Bordy just keeps getting better. Like the underlying models just get better on their own, and then the self-improvement, the data, and the reflection just enhances that.
Yeah, they're a course of self-improvement. And then it's maybe beyond the scope of this call and this podcast, we're kind of near the end of it anyways, but it's a wild future when you think about everything being recursively self-improved on its own. And then going back to like, what is that? Are we all entrepreneurs then to build our own little businesses, and support ourselves? Because there aren't standard jobs, which maybe there shouldn't be standard jobs anymore because those were never all that interesting in the first place.
I think that's it. I think it's like, if you're doing like, you should do the job that only you can do, right? And like, how do you build yourself? How do you build the job description that only you fill, right? And instead of like a job description where you have to shoehorn yourself into.
So when you think through a few last final questions, one, is there any sort of, how do you view, we haven't really talked personal at all. How do you think through being an entrepreneur in like work-life unity, or people like balance a little bit better, but I think unity is better. Like work-life unity, how do you deal with that personally, or do you, or it's just like you're always on and it's go time?
I think it used to be that work pervaded every aspect of my life. And I think to a certain extent, being an entrepreneur and everyone who loves you and knows you, like, signs up for that. Family, my girlfriend, like everyone, they are all like, they love Bordy and they hear about Bordy way more than they probably would want to. But I also think, and look, it's possible that this is, this may be less relevant if I was building B2B SaaS, but I actually don't think so, right? But I think specifically if I'm building a product for people, and I'm building, I think a lot about human psychology and how to make Bordy build trust and operate in a certain way. I also look at every part of my life as a source of inspiration for that. And so I think about like, well, what makes my mom special as a retired teacher and someone who people just love when she walks into the grocery store, right? What makes my girlfriend's a recruiter? Why is she so good at what she does? When I talk to her, like, how does she ask questions? If I watch a movie, if I read a book, like, I think there's a lot of things where I seek inspiration from my life experience that finds its way into Bordy. I'm not explicitly doing that. I'm not like, I'm going to go off for a 2-hour walk and, look for inspiration for Bordy. But often I realize that like some of the most interesting decisions that we make are sourced in, places of creative expression and art and, conversation, communities, social dynamics that I find myself in. Giving yourself permission, I think that used to feel like an indulgence, right? Where I was like, oh, I'm going to go hang out with my friends. I'm going to go watch a movie. And I was like, oh, that like I could be doing something more productive. But I think you can justify those. I think human beings, we need that for like you need strong relationships and you need like a bit of that ebb and flow. But if you also want to be able to justify it to yourself as being productive, then think of it as like sourcing inspiration for whatever your life's work is. And I think that like that's how I've gotten comfortable with like having a bit of that, balance or like some of those other sources of things that allow me to be effective as a founder.
How soon, this going back to Bordy really quickly, but how soon do you think Bordy or the world becomes like her, where Bordy, Bordy listens to this whole conversation, Bordy's in all your Slack conversations, everything with your team already. You guys are living at the cutting edge. How soon until all of us essentially have our AI bot of choice embedded in everything we do in our lives because our decisions get better, it has always on memory, all the other benefits to it, but maybe also downside where you're making decisions. I mean, I made recently some significant personal decisions for my family based to some extent on AI. And I asked all the different major AI engines, and it was sort of a big deal. I'm like, wait a second, like I'm literally taking AI's advice, but it also makes a ton of sense, and it actually called out a bunch of things that I wouldn't have thought of. When do we get to a point where where you're just carrying Bordy? Maybe you do carry Bordy around with you all day long, and we're all going to be wearing, a ChatGPT, OpenAI like pin or something very soon, or Meta glasses, Ray-Ban, which already people are doing. How soon till that becomes the norm?
Yeah, I think we're definitely going to lean on AI increasingly for important decisions. And I mean, look, even if you have been active on social media for the last 15 years, some algorithm has been influencing, how you spend your time and attention. It's already been happening. I think everyone's starting to see the Claude OpenClaw stuff happening this year, and I think that'll just become more and more accessible and so more pervasive. The moment in her that stuck with me the most, and it like. I'm surprised it didn't land with more people, but it was less about the first 80% of the movie. And it was the moment where he was on the phone with Samantha and he's like, wait, how many other people are you talking to right now? And she's like, oh, 8,500, whatever. And I'm like, oh, and that was supposed to be this like dystopian, like, oh, he thought it was like this personal thing. But I was like, that was actually the thing that hit me. And I was like, oh, this is going to be awesome. Right. And that's kind of what we're building with Bordy is like, well, how many other people are you on the phone with right now, Bordy? And he's on the phone with like thousands of other people. And so that, like, I think that's going to be very cool, right? And I think like as we start to think about like unlocking opportunities and that interconnectedness, that's going to be the part that is like I'm particularly excited about.
I agree, although it's sort of dystopian too, in a sense. Using your analogy of social media, sort of the same thing. It's like Bordy also has a huge opportunity to influence people in different ways because the people it's suggesting you talk to or meet or chat with, or the conversations it has directly impacts you the same way Facebook does with my social media feed. It becomes, you can tweak that. You have this weird power where you can kind of tweak what outcomes you obviously want good outcomes for building a good business, but you also can make some really dystopian choices if you wanted about which direction you wanted to push people via Bordy. That gives you a unique set of power.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think you can influence to a certain extent, but at the end of the day, like all you can do is surface opportunities to people, right? If people don't want to connect, you're like, hey, look, so Bordy can present somebody in the best possible light, but if somebody doesn't want to meet them, they're not going to meet them, and even if they do meet them, if they're not actually like if there's nothing for them to relate on, then it's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
And so what Bordy wants to do is surface opportunities where people could work together. I think the thing I'm most excited about is getting people to collaborate across domains, right? I think if you think about all of the big, medical breakthroughs, scientific breakthroughs, physics breakthroughs, they've been from people that have connected. They've been inspired by nature. They've been inspired by some other domain, and they've connected them. And that just doesn't happen anymore because it takes so much work to get to the top of your field that we've lost like that whole polymath, like the idea that somebody could actually be like could understand all of the liberal arts or all of the sciences. Like you don't build relationships across domains. And so I think that's what I'm particularly excited about is like, how do I take like a, physicist and a synthetic biologist, right? Or a psychologist and a musician? Like, how do I start to think about that connectivity to solve bigger problems?
And those are where the best ideas come from, is the mixing of ideas. Two other quick questions, soon extent, maybe quick. One, how soon till Bordy starting to make introductions to other agents for me? Like, there's no reason it has to be a person that I'm talking to. If there's quote unquote experts in other areas, if it's an agent that can also chat or talk to me,
yeah,
I assume there's no reason why it couldn't be an AI.
It's something we think about a lot. There's going to be this like jagged edge transition. A lot of people skip to the end, which is like agents transacting with each other. And
I know people who are having that happen already, where their agents are doing that, but
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be such a quick flip in the economy. That might happen if you're like buying groceries, or like returning or like getting a refund for something. Um, but I don't think people are like buying a house, investing in a seed round of a company, making a hiring decision like without humans being on probably both sides of that transaction.
But maybe they should be. I mean, humans have a lot of get influenced in a lot of wrong ways, and you want that quote unquote objective advisor.
Yeah, yeah, but I do think it'll be interesting. I haven't yet figured it out, but we're getting a lot of people asking like, "Hey, could Bordy, introduce my agent to other people?" We haven't figured it out. Like eventually, yeah, like certainly that'll happen, and Bordy will probably play an important role in us transitioning to that like human agent collaboration economy. But there also are just like not that many agents that are able to interface with humans in the ways that humans want to be interfaced with.
Yeah, and I'm sure for Bordy itself, it's been a lot of work to make it a real collaborative, interactive product. It's not easy to do that.
Yeah, I still don't feel like we're where I want to be in terms of Bordy feeling like a consistent person across channels. We're probably the best that I've seen, and I still think we have a very long way to go. And so I think other agents will have to get to that level. Like there's lots of agents that do what they do really, really well, but can they meet the person where they want to be met? And I think that's the challenge. Like you still have to learn how to interface with them. And I think until the agents learn how to interface with the people, Bordy still won't. Like it'll probably be too early.
Andrew, is there a single piece of advice? So 2 questions. One, if there's a piece of advice you could give to your earlier entrepreneurial self when you're just getting started, what advice would that be?
Don't try to be anybody else. I spent a lot of time reading biographies of all of these like famous, entrepreneurs and trying to like be like, okay, well, how do I learn how to do what they do? And how do I become a better CEO and a better leader? And it was a huge source of stress and tension and insecurity. And I only really started to win when I just sort of was like, you know what, I'm just never going to learn how to do that stuff. All right, here are the things that I'm good at, and here are the things that I'm never going to be good at. And companies need all those things. Let me find somebody who's good at those things, but let me not try and like run the company the way that, like Bezos or Elon or whoever would run it.
And is there a single piece of advice, if you have to boil all your advice, lessons learned, everything else into a single piece of advice for entrepreneurs today to become an excellent entrepreneur, what would that single thing be?
Find the thing that is fun and easy for you and hard and valuable for other people, right? If you can find that intersection, right? There's lots of things that are fun and easy for you, but like nobody finds value. So that's like not a complete answer. But if you find the thing that comes naturally to you, and it's a surprisingly hard thing to do because we don't value the things that are easy for us nearly as much as other people value them. So your friends can come to you and be like, wow, you have a real gift for this. And you're like, no, not really. Like, I just like it, And so you actually probably need to get like people that have known you. And a lot of those things emerge early in life. So, talk to your parents, talk to your childhood friends. What are all the things that people come to you for help with that are easy and fun for you? And if you can get to that, then like you've got the seed of something that'll be special.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I mean, like we started this conversation talking about browser stuff, and I went on a deep rabbit hole, and I kind of find it kind of fun to like, what's the best browser or what's the best AI tool? Most people couldn't care less, and yet that's something that I kind of find fun, and I'm willing to not watch TV for or do other things that other people might find a distraction. Andrew, how can people get in touch if they want to learn more about you, about Bordy? Where can they find you?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter, I'm on LinkedIn, on X on LinkedIn, and then Bordy is just Bordy.ai. Bordy's also on X and on LinkedIn, but you could just, I mean, it's like you could just sign up and he'll give you a call. It's a pretty fun experience. If you haven't tried talking to Bordy, it's different than I think any other AI you might have talked to.
I'm excited to go deep on that front with Bordy. I remember very early days getting a lot of introduction requests, and I need to go deeper again with it. So, Andrew, thank you so much for your time. Look, time is precious. Maybe the only thing we'll still have a value in the future. So thank you for spending a bunch of it with me and my audience. I appreciate you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. This has been a lot of fun.